There was a fire in her blood, coursing through her veins like magma. The flames fed on the anxiety that she could not wrangle or tame. The copper evening was slipping into the plum-colored dusk, but a pitch-black night had already crawled into Cassandra's mind, digging a hollow feeling into the certainty that Tarakon's presence brought her, and filling it with that damned anxious ticking, fingers reaching closer and closer, with hot sparks spitting from their tips with each snap that sought to close itself on her, to pinch her out of her mind. She had to find him. She had to know. He would break this for her. She wanted to run, but the gnawing thoughts distracted her from seeing her path. It hindered her from a quicker trot, but she tried anyway. She seemed to fall forward more than walk. Where he could be, she could not say. Though its inhabitants were small, the valley was large. Even with her earlier tour, she was not completely familiar with the grounds. She followed the path from Rusty's tent past the bathhouse and along the terraces. From this vantage she could see the logs being placed along the shallow slope of the valley high ground on a dry patch in the otherwise sodden mountain belly where the community could gather for the following night. There were taller bodies helping in the construction of the rudimentary amphitheater, surely the soldiers of her company. She bounded down the hill. Any face that was not his was obsolete to her. She passed them, the only ones relative to her size, the only ones that she did not necessarily tower over the way that she towered over every brownie. Cassandra was blind to Karen's bloodshot scowl. Nasu's grimace had found its way through her fret, but it was not enough to quell it. Tarakon's smile did, however. The bundle of firewood tied with twine fell from his shoulder at her approach. Cassandra, she took his hand in hers, kneading the cold knuckles in her palm. Your hands are frozen, she started curtly. He smiled. Yes, and you are warm. I need to talk to you, she demanded, usurping his comment. She pulled his arm, but he could not be dragged off before making a gesture to excuse himself at an uninterested elderly brownie. She pulled him around the slope to the far side of the valley, out of the way of the amphitheater's bustle. They settled on the bank of the agricultural marsh beneath some branches stretching out from the surrounding woods. Critters chirped their vibrato lullabies to the forest night, which had already begun under the shadowy blanket of the canopy. The debate between night and day still raged in the sky over the valley clearing. Though the sun had yet to surrender, all that was left of the day was the burning wreckage of the sky as it crashed into the surrounding mountains, outlining their peaks with warm ambient light. She pulled him to her, and drilled into him with her amethyst eyes. She knew their power. Are you nice to me only because you have to be? She had hoped to sound authoritative, indignant. Her inquisition was rendered pathetic by a quiver in her voice, and nothing could mask that plea in her timbre. She had spoken so quickly and with such urgency that Tarakon was taken completely by surprise. How could he answer? What? This time Cassandra gave up the ruse. She needed to speak plainly, or else she might not be able to say anything at all. Are you nice to me only because you have to be? Why would you think that? Tarakon countered with a cocked brow. That is how you are with my mother. The words seemed to explode from her. You accommodate her, and your father. Hey, calm down. He pressed his hand gently against her shoulder. The softness of his tone baited her into submission. I told you before, I have more motivation than simply being pleasurable. Her breathing was hot and stunted as she sought to vent the passions that were claiming her better judgment. I am worried, she said, barely managing to hold his gaze with her weak eyes. I think that you are only accommodating me. With this confession past, Cassandra mustered some strength. She sighed and continued, You saved me, Tarakon. Saved me from a monster that I could neither name nor place. Tarakon grew silent and attuned himself to her. She needed him to listen, so he did. Sedwa came at me, like she came at my mother years ago. How foolish we can be. She seemed to drift a little. I would have traded in so much for the silence she offered. Her gaze returned to him, stronger yet. Then I remembered your voice, what you said, and I could not trade it in. Tarakon, I will take the scratching and the gnawing and the fret-filled nights to keep the aspiration you had for me. You reminded me that I want, that there's so much that I want, and that I want something for you. Rummage as he might, Tarakon could not know what she wanted. In all those years that she fell under his care, she acknowledged him with no regard that was less than reasonably filial. He tucked the flowers she snatched from the garden for him behind his ear and cradled her head on his sleeve when he lulled her to sleep. What could he have missed in watching her grow every day? What could she know for which he was not already prepared? Perhaps there was still some distance between them that their history had not bridged. He could not know what she wanted. He could never know, but he would make peace with his shortcomings. What is it? I cannot answer that, Cassandra said with a broken smile. I could get you to answer it, but I will not be accommodated. Tarakan, you cannot help me, and you will not placate me. I forgive you, though. Please know that I forgive you. Tarakan was too baffled by her pardon to begin exploring the quandary of her embrace. Without warning, she had wrapped him in her arms and buried her head against his chest. Tarakan's wide eyes searched her hairs as though the answer might be wrapped in the plate. I am sorry for what I have put you through, Cassandra sobbed. Never in all the human fables that you read me has there been a witch as cruel as I have been to you. She pressed herself back from him and gathered her contrition. How can you be so patient with me? An answer came easily, but accepting it proved difficult. To say so little would mean too much. His phrasing was careful. Maybe you are right. I do accommodate you. It must be because I do not know how else to answer you other than by saying, because it must be. Their heads remained bowed in silence while they both stole glances from beneath their brow to test the tension between them. The silence grew stale. When I was young, right before you were born, I had a general that was very much like you. She was willful, but a good witch. She taught me that sometimes to stand your ground you have to bend with the breeze. Tarakan's mind jumped to Draco's glove caught in Nesu's tempest. Tarakan longed to tell Cassandra, but Nesu's orders were quite clear. Only now, with her at his side, could Tarakan see what Nesu meant by Cassandra becoming despondent. She did seem fragile. He took her hand and led her back to the bustle on the high ground. We have not had a real chance to talk. Tarakan chanced the conversation. What happened? Where did you go? Cassandra needed time to mull his answer, and her next question. Diverting the conversation felt like a correct next step. Nesu is always going on about being aware of my surroundings. I dare not let on how often I've slipped in and out of danger. Her tone was distant, reflective. I did not know it was a trap until it was sprung. I thought it was a note that you, or maybe my mother, had left for me. In a moment I found myself in a cellar, chained to a wall by Orkan's cuffs. That bowl of rice for lunch today made me so happy. It must have been my first real meal in days. Sedwa was going to keep me on the brink of death and intercept the Hexen curse from my first child. Like I said, you saved me. Then Orkan saved us. Orkan did not save Dion, or Reimu, Simon. Draco was not walking beside them. Tarakan had held back so long and wanted nothing more than to speak their bitter names off his tongue. He swallowed and gritted his teeth. And you, what happened? How did you find me? Cassandra begged. They came to the high ground in the valley where long logs were being laid in a concentric figure along the slopes. A roaring fire billowed embers and smoke and cast an ambient haze that lit the laborers as they toiled in the night. Nesu found a fairy in your room, who told us where you were. Queen Osmara had a squad assembled. We were sworn to secrecy and under cover of darkness sailed from Osmara to the mainland. It hurt so much to ignore those names, their memories. We crossed the Vorsan panhandle. Then one night, Nikan... Tarakan stuttered with wonder. Where was the Kaldaran gamesman? He let the matter go and gathered his fragmented story to continue. One night, there was a curious clap of thunder. We followed it, found Castle Lumsa, and found you. Tarakan's gaze lifted over Cassandra's shoulder, and he noticed the fire's light glinting in Eloise's silver-white hair. Eloise! He shouted. Of course, Cassandra conceded. Who else came with you? Princess Cassandra, your Captain Eloise of Mercedes, Tarakan introduced. Eloise bound over at Tarakan's request. The soft fabric of her tunic did nothing to disguise the tone of her body beneath, and it left Cassandra oddly conscious of her own physique. The roping muscles of Eloise's wrists and the breadth and curve of her shoulders could not have been more different from Cassandra's elegant frame. Eloise's short, feathered hair and cocky grin could not betray a beauty about her, but Cassandra could see how it might be disguised in the costume and company of the military. Seeing Tarkhan and Eloise standing side by side showed what war could do to a body. "Tao Mei," Cassandra opened the communication, "and thank you. I owe you and everyone so much." Eloise had stooped to receive Cassandra's recognition, then cracked a patient smile with her response. "The honor was earned in having served." Cassandra returned the smile, humored by the similarity between the captains. Tarkhan had answered her with the same doting tone of Eloise's response. "My friend Darrell is here as well," Tarkhan said. "And Major Karen," Eloise added. "Karen?" Cassandra exclaimed. The name triggered Cassandra's delight and Tarkhan's terror. He threw a bewildered, offended face at Eloise, who caught the danger in her statement only too late. For almost 20 years, Tarkhan had watched over Cassandra, doted on her every need. That she could surprise him at all seemed a total mystery. Their history was of absolutely no use, however. She could surprise him, outwit him, and evade him. In the time it took Tarkhan and Eloise to recognize the danger of their words, Cassandra had escaped their conversation and was only steps short of the Major. Karen sat alone at the end of a log nearest the fire, her elbows propped on her knees, and a mug of the fermented beverage in hand. The fire, reflected in the glaze of her eyes, seemed to mirror some indiscernible writhing within her. "Karen!" Cassandra called. Tarkhan and Eloise pursued Cassandra, but slowed only steps away. Cassandra wrapped her arms around the brunette woman, stirring her from her repose. "Karen," Cassandra repeated, "you are here. Oh, thank you. Thank you so much. Are you well? How is Draco?" The only face that remained flushed was Cassandra's. Blood drained from the others, leaving only their ghastly stares. Karen gawked at Cassandra, then noticed Tarkhan standing behind the princess. Recognition morphed into an intense, accusing glare. Tarkhan's heart curdled with guilt. Karen studied him. She craved an answer, but also knew that she would pounce if he dared make one. His gall was too much to bear. "Karen?" Cassandra was holding the Major at arm's length, still waiting on a response. Karen tripped back into consciousness, sick with vertigo from slipping in and out of her own thoughts and reflections. Karen stared long and hard into Cassandra's eyes. A breath that she had thoughtlessly held burst from her, and within it a stream of tears that she had dammed. She wrenched out of Cassandra's arms to stand. "I cannot do this right now." She laughed with a delirious smile and briskly walked off. Cassandra, still seated on the log, watched the Major walk off confounded. "What?" "Forgive her," Nesu's husk baritone commanded. "She has been ill lately." His tone changed, and more warmly he added, "We are all very happy to have you back safely." Cassandra sighed with understanding, while Tarkhan stared Nesu down. "No, she's not." Tarkhan's outburst had wound up all of their attention. His words had slipped from his tongue on his own. Nesu's brow corrugated. It was too late now. He could not and would not stop. Tarkhan broke his angry gaze from Nesu and poured himself at Cassandra. "Your brother Draco came with us." "Draco is—" Cassandra started, but for the first time that anyone could remember, her attempt to interrupt Tarkhan failed. "We were ambushed in the desert." Nesu snatched at Cassandra's arm and hissed, "Cassandra, I must speak with you." "Draco fought hard, but fell. We tried, Cassandra. Please, Taoesh, know that we tried. But he fell. Draco is dead." The confession broke like an avalanche, every word raking Nesu as it tumbled out. The vizier's face twisted with fury. Nesu's breathing began to shiver out of its regular rhythmic calm. Each breath was like a bellows to the flames in his eyes. Nesu's regard had cracked, and he pitched the princess's narrow wrist away and stood. "You!" Nesu sneered and pointed a solitary finger at the purse-lipped captain. The black tar of guilt began to swim through Tarkhan's blood. He could feel it drifting against the current in his veins. It settled toward the bottom, weighing on and anchoring him in the Hierophant's undivided attention. Instinct curled and writhed away, pulling on Tarkhan but succeeding only in tearing at the seams of his consciousness. Cassandra pressed softly on Nasu's wrist, diverting the vizier's attention and the captain's slaughter. Cassandra's slaughter had only begun. Already the tears had bled from her eyes, and for once no one had spared the time to notice. The tear on her cheek secured the attention of the silent captain and vizier. "Draco is dead?" "Yes, your highness." Nasu's composure was slowly reined back to its patient arrogance. "Draco is dead." "Draco," Cassandra echoed as she stood, and then chased after Karen.